Hello there, I'm Guildmaster Dan, and welcome to the Fourth Wall. Now, something I've tried to do with this show is to keep it centered around giving advice. Because there are a lot of great channels and great YouTubers out there who talk about topics surrounding role-playing games that they really just kind of discuss and give their insight. But I've really tried to make the Fourth Wall a tool for game masters and sometimes players. I really want this show to be useful for people and not just intriguing. But that being said, there is something I've been wanting to talk about recently because a lot of people seem to misconstrue the aspects around it. And I think it actually is pretty important because it goes back to something core and something integral in, role-playing and with its roots in Dungeons & Dragons. So today, we're going to be talking about Paladins. So let me begin by saying that this is actually a really hard topic for me to talk about. I had a real hard time doing this video because I just started and stopped it like so many times, and it just kept going in the wrong direction because there's a lot of things to talk about with Paladins. And, I'm really tempted to just defend the class to naysayers and kind of clarify what a Paladin is in here. But I'm not going to do that. Like I said in the intro, I'm going to focus on giving advice. And for that, this episode is going to be mostly for players, but also for game masters. In that I'm going to talk about how to play and make a good paladin. And it's good for game masters as well because if you have a murky sense of what a paladin is or maybe a false sense of what a paladin is, that'll reflect in the world around the players because, as much as we like to say that we're impartial, admittedly, we're not. And our worlds are going to reflect our opinions of things. So, I hope that my advice for how to make a good paladin will come across and maybe help some game masters in at least clarifying, what a paladin is and how the world should see them. Now, that being said, let's go ahead and get started. In order to talk about Paladins, you have to lay the groundwork of, in Dungeons & Dragons, their alignment. Because there's even some confusion here. Paladins are lawful good. Period. If you're not lawful good, you're not a Paladin. You may be a knight, or you may be an anti-Paladin with those other alignments, but Paladins are lawful good, period. There is no wiggle room here. They are lawful good because they are the paragons of lawful good. They are not perfect, but they seek perfection of lawful good. That being said, a lot of the confusion with that comes down to people's interpretations of the D&D alignments. And admittedly, down the road, supplements have come out which have opened up Paladins to other alignments. And truth be told, those other alignment Paladins, they're not really Paladins. Because Paladin is something specific. It was a class created to emulate something specific. A lot of people don't know. Paladins were real things. They were holy warriors. They were warriors of the church. Spoony, he had a great finish to his Ultima retrospective where he described what the real Paladins were. And even beyond that, those real Paladins were inspiration for lots of characters in literature that became the real inspiration for Dungeons & Dragons Paladins. And Paladins are not meant to be, they're not meant to be things other than lawful good. The only real other Paladin you could say is an anti-Paladin, and that's just because it's in the name. Anti-Paladins are essentially to a Paladin what the Antichrist is to Christ. They are beings of chaos and evil. They are the polar opposite. They are the avatars of evil and the avatars of chaos and anarchy. That's just what they are. Where Paladins emanate good, anti-Paladins emanate evil. They are polar opposites. They are Paladin only in the fact that the word is in their name. Otherwise, paladins are lawful good. And, some people get confused about what lawful good is. Like I said, that's where the confusion came from. Some people interpret lawful good as meaning, of the law. Well, what if the law is evil, or things like that? So I'm going to break down lawful good for you just real quick. I'm not going to get into alignments a lot today, mainly because I intend to visit them down the road, visiting each one of them separately. But I'm going to give a quick definition for what lawful good means in this case, and we'll visit again later. But where a lot of the confusion with lawful good comes in is the implications of the words that are used. A lot of people think that the good part of it is subjective and like, well, what is good? Especially for a character who typically kills things, can that really be considered good? All right. And what about lawful? How does that not translate into being of the law? Well, it's because the alignments were meant to emulate something specific again, just like the Paladins. And in this case, I feel that it works. It's a lot easier to understand if you change the words themselves to something more specific, to something that fits what it's trying to emulate a little bit better. Lawful doesn't mean of the law. It doesn't mean that you are a proponent of, the law of the land or the dogma of your church. No, it means that you believe in an ideal. It means disciplined. And what you are disciplined to, your ideals that you believe in, can vary. It could mean you believe in love, you believe in the human spirit, you believe in pacifism, you believe in the church, and it in fact could mean that you believe in the law of the land. However, what tempers what your ideals are is the second part of that, good. And again, in this case, good, a lot of people tend to think that's a subjective term. For what it was trying to emulate, no, it's not. In this case, it means selflessness. It means you act in the best interests of others and not yourself. You seek to protect others, you seek to serve others. And that kind of tempers what ideals you have and vice versa. That means the ideals you have, you're not going to follow the law of the land if the law of the land is, say, slavery. Slavery is evil. It subjugates others. And you live to serve others. You're not going to allow that. You will work against the law of the land or the dogma of your church if it acts out of evil. And we'll actually touch on that topic a little bit later. But the idea is that as a paladin, you are lawful good. You are disciplined, selfless. It means that you believe in ideals and you act in the best interest of others. You do not think of self first. You think of others first. Next, Andrew at the Don Forge cast on the Monday Night Gaming channel, he did a review of the Paladin class in which he talked about what it is to play a human Paladin character. He didn't mean literal human, he meant a realistic Paladin character. He made a very interesting point in that a lot of people seem to think that Paladins are this Dudley Do-Right or the Tick, where, they're that stone-jawed lover of justice that can do no wrong and cannot allow others to do any wrong. And though that's right to an extent, that is an extreme. It's a cartoonish simplification of what a paladin is. In truth, paladins are people, and that means that they're not perfect. They make wrong decisions, and they can make contradictory decisions. That doesn't mean that they stop being paladins. What that means is they made a mistake. And what makes them paladins is that they redeem for it. They have an ideal of perfection, of being a paragon, of being like their god of goodness or justice. And, they want to be like that. And they strive their entire lives to be like that. But, there's certain realization in that they realize how far away from that they are. They realize that they will never be that perfect. They'll never, be the embodiment of that ideal. but they try anyway, and that's what makes them paladins. And when they fail, they try to do it again anyway. They try to redeem themselves in the eyes of their god, or even in their own eyes. They work to reach that ideal, and that's what makes them paladins. Just because paladins believe in doing the right thing doesn't mean they always do. They will never consciously do the wrong thing, mind you. They will never choose to do evil. The moment that they do, they stop being paladins. But a paladin can do the wrong thing and can, in fact, unwittingly or unwittingly commit an evil act. They could lie, or they could, wrongfully steal. They could do something that breaks their code of honor and of goodness. And, they have to deal with that. And their way of dealing with that is redemption, trying again, trying harder, and just continuing trying. Again, Andrew made some good points about that. He talked a little more on it, but I just wanted to bring it up because it is a very good point about paladins. What paladins live for is an ideal that they'll never reach, but they are paladins for trying anyway. Now, when it comes to making a paladin, a lot of people think that there's nothing to it beyond the rules beyond the rules that you live by, beyond your code of honor. That's not true. They are people, and they are characters, not caricatures. And they have a lot to them. And when you're going to make a paladin, you're going to be coming up with essentially your personality and your background. Here's some things that I recommend for you to make a good, compelling paladin to play. First is have a good sense of morality, or again, in this case, selflessness. What does it mean to be selfless? What does it mean to think of others before yourself? Next, you also want to have a good sense of what other ideals you believe in. What God do you worship? What ideals does that God embody? For example, you can have a paladin who worships a god of love versus a paladin who worships a god of justice. And even though they're both paladins and they both do what is right when they believe it is right, or do what is right because they believe it is right, they also embody different aspects. One will have a tinge of, because they believe in love, they might not be quite as martial. Sure, they'll carry weapons, but maybe they are, maybe they will argue for diplomacy more often. Granted, all paladins typically argue for diplomacy first, but, the paladin of love might press it even more. They also might be seeking out partners to explore their love with. They might be ethical sluts, and that may make some of you laugh, but look up what the term means. On the other side, the paladin of justice might be a proper knight, whereas the other one just was just a warrior of the church. Whereas, paladin of justice might be a knight. He might go out and work with the city guard and help protect it from criminals. He might be quicker to use the sword than the paladin of love. The point, you'll get different types of paladins. So having a sense of what their other ideals are, what they prescribe to, what their church preaches, is also a good idea, especially if there's contradictions there, because that's something for your character to wrestle with, which is kind of the next thing I want to talk about. In going with that whole redemption thing, a good way to give your paladin character is to realize that they weren't always a paladin. They weren't born to attempt to be this paragon. They were a person first. They're a person after, but the point is they were a normal person first. And because of that, coming into being a paladin, they have temptations. And I highly recommend picking one or two, something that they daily have to wrestle with in contention with their code and their beliefs. Maybe the paladin of justice is more chaste and doesn't really want to be bogged down by, relationships, doesn't want to be over impassioned. Maybe he believes in being, emotionless and controlling your emotions. Well, maybe that's because, he really likes his women or his men, doesn't matter. He really likes sex. And, he's tempted. And every time he goes by a brothel or sees a beautiful woman or a beautiful man, whatever, he is tempted, and that's why he's so emotional, is he has to force himself to control his emotions because he knows he wants that other person, even though they've never met. Or maybe the Paladin of Love, similarly, it could be a vice. Maybe the Paladin of Love, though they believe in free love and that sort of thing, maybe they like to drink a little too much. Maybe when they get to drinking, maybe their beliefs start to slip, and that's a problem. They have to contend with that. Pick a couple of temptations for your Paladin to have to wrestle with and weigh against their code and their sense of honor. That'll make them a more dynamic and 3D character. And the last thing I already mentioned is, like, remember that Paladins do what is right, not because they're told to do it, but because they believe in it. The Paladin does what they believe is right because they believe that's what's right. They believe in protecting others. They believe in, peace before war. They believe in these things. They don't just do it because it's in their dogma or because it's in the law. They do it because they believe that's what's right. They don't allow slavery, they don't allow slavery or they never allow slavery to happen, but they will not allow slavery to happen, not because it's illegal, but because it's wrong. You are subjugating others. You are pressing them under your boot heel. You are making them less than people, and that's wrong, and that's why I will never allow it to happen. That's why Paladins do things. But, there's some confusion there about, how should my Paladin act? How do I know when I should do what's right? When in real life, there's lots of grays, and how can I be this person who believes in these things? Well, that's why when it came down to having a good sense of what your code is and what your morality is. And to help you with that, there's a couple things I have for you. The first is, if you're going to be playing a Paladin, and you have a different sense of what a Paladin is than what I'm talking about, or if you're just not sure what a Paladin is, watch the movie Kingdom of Heaven. Well, there's a lot of evil in there. There's a lot of hypocrisy. A lot of people saying that they're holy knights, and they're really not. Two characters in that movie I want you to look at. The first is Orlando Bloom's character, Balin. Fantastic example of a lawful good character. He's not always lawful good in that movie, but he becomes it, and he really embodies it. The second is the Hospitaller character, the one played by David Thewlis, I believe his name is. He's another perfect example of Paladin. Heck, you could even argue that you have Balin, Orlando Bloom, being the example of lawful good, and the Hospitaller being the example of the actual Paladin. The first thing I want to show you is actually a clip. And I couldn't get into the video, but I do have a link for you to a specific YouTube video, which I'm going to include right here on Aria. So I want you to go ahead and click on that and, well, pause my video, then click on that and give it a watch. It's only like a minute long. Okay, are we back? All right, very good. All right. Now, just like he was saying, what is holy, what God wants is not for you to obey rules. It's for you to do what is right. And the only way that a Paladin can do that is to judge it day to day in what they are confronted with. Paladins don't always do what is right. They make split decisions, and they do what they believe is right. And they work to do it for others. What he's saying there is a perfect example of how to be a Paladin, is to do what is right from day to day, or what you view as right from day to day. Those confusing situations that people who don't like Paladins like to bring up. Well, what do you do about goblin babies or whatever? Don't know. A Paladin's is not going to know what they're going to do in that situation until that second. Yes, that's a hard question to ask them, when you're dealing with grays and stuff. But every time a Paladin comes across a gray, there is no right or wrong answer. They do what they believe is right in that moment, and they deal with the consequences of it after the fact. But they will always accept the consequences of it after the fact. Next is also from that movie, Kingdom of Heaven. If you're still kind of murky about what to do as a Paladin, I kind of borrowed the Knight's Oath from that movie and modified it a little bit to help you keep in mind of a good just general code of how Paladins act and what they believe in. So I'm just going to read this off for you, And when you're being a paladin, if you don't have a good sense of like what the god is about, just know that paladins act in this general sense. First, show bravery. Paladins are not coward. They know that if they do nothing, no one else will. They have to act. They will show bravery. They will stand up for the people who will not stand up for themselves. Second, protect the weak. What I just said. Will protect those who cannot stand up for themselves because no one else will. Next, suffer no evil. Paladins will never allow evil to happen if they can stop it. If they do, they are not paladins. Next, always tell the truth, even if it leads to your own death. Now that's something from the movie that doesn't directly go, or doesn't necessarily correlate to a paladin, but I feel that for paladins, it's a very good one. It's something that a lot of people kind of look over when they're playing paladins. That they don't really seem to consider that what they're trying for is an ideal. And in all truth, telling a lie is inherently negative. You are being deceptive. Regardless of the reason, you are being deceptive. You are attempting to deceive whoever you were talking to, even if it's with the best of intentions. Everyone knows the road to hell is paved with the best intentions. Well, in this case, it's something that a lot of people overlook, but I think it fits very well for paladins, and I highly recommend that if you were playing a paladin to try and do this, because it really sets you apart from other people who are lawful good that are not paladins. And I'm going to repeat that. Always tell the truth, even if it leads to your death. Lastly, this is something that was not in the Knight's Oath, but also it defines what it means to be a paladin over, say, just a knight. Paladins always strive for their ideals, knowing that they can never reach them. And that's going back to what Andrew said, and it's a very good point. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from actually Final Fantasy VII Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, where I believe it's President Shinra's brother, Rufus's brother. I forget his name, but he asks Zack in that, well, what's your dream? And Zack says, to be a first-class soldier. He's like, the best type of dream, one you can never attain. And that's absolutely true, especially when it comes to paladins. It is not being perfect that makes a paladin what he is. It is the pursuit of being perfect that makes a paladin what he is. He is always bettering himself in trying to be that. He will always try to be good because he believes in it. When he fails, he will get up, get back on the horse, and try again. It is that pursuit that makes him or her who they are. Now, I do have a couple more things for you. Just further clarifications. I mean, for the old school gamers who grew up in the beginning that know the literature that I'm referring to, when I say that D&D was trying to emulate specific characters, it's really easy for you to think of role models for people that you can base your character off of, at least in how they act. But for modern day gamers, there's a lot of confusion there about how paladins act. And even though I just talked about it this whole time, I feel that it makes it a little easier if you have a good example of how paladins act in role models. And I just have a short list of role models that I want to share with you, one of which I'm going to follow up with a clip, and we're going to talk about it real briefly. The first, again, like I mentioned in Kingdom of Heaven, you have Balin or the Hospitaller. Both of them act perfectly for what lawful good means. And since paladins are like the paragons of lawful good, they're both good examples of how a paladin would act. A more popular example, which we have a clip for in a little bit, is Optimus Prime is a perfect example of a paladin. Not only does he act in lawful good, but he also has a connection to the mystical, which has really come out in more recent years, particularly with this past series, Transformers Prime. that really exemplifies what a Paladin is. Next, Captain America, another great example. This past Marvel movie, even though everyone else kind of looked at him like he was schmaltzy, yeah, absolutely he acted like a Paladin. He was completely lawful good. He never stopped thinking of others first. You know, that scene where he jumps on the grenade that turns out to be a dummy, he didn't do that for glory. He did that because he didn't want anyone else to be hurt. And last one, I didn't... When I was thinking about these role models, I couldn't really think of a character from the modern video game industry that really fit what a Paladin is, that didn't come from another medium first. You could pick, Optimus Prime, Captain America, or even Superman in video games as being Paladins. But, they came from other things first, cartoon or comic books. But as I thought about it, I did think of one. And no, it's not Cecil from Final Fantasy IV. He is Paladin. He may be a Paladin in name, but you don't really get... He does not really act... you don't really get a sense of how Paladins act from him in that game. No, actually, the good example of modern gaming Paladin is Frog from Chrono Trigger. And he's a perfect example of a Paladin. Granted, he's not a Paladin in the game, he's a knight. But he acts like a Paladin. His actions are those of a Paladin. And when you're playing through that game, I highly recommend going back and playing that game because it's an awesome game. And Frog's an awesome character. You can get behind him. Actually, I'm not going to spoil that for you, but we'll just say Frog is a good leader because of his actions as a Paladin. And lastly, I want to set up this clip of Optimus Prime that I wanted to show you because it's really what inspired this entire video. It was a combination of this and hearing what some other people thought of Paladins and their misconceptions of it. I watched this episode, and when I saw it, I couldn't help but, clap. Because, and I don't mean like full-on applause, but I mean like, oh, great job. In this episode, it's the last episode of Season 2 in Transformers Prime, called Darkest Hour. And in this episode, this entire episode's great. If you want to see how a Paladin acts, watch this entire episode. It's fantastic. It has multiple points in it where he demonstrates what it means to be a Paladin. But one scene in particular that I have this clip for is when the Transformers are interacting with a device, an artifact, known as the Omega Lock. You see, in Transformers Prime, Cybertron has been dead for a long time now. The reason why they're battling on Earth is because Cybertron's gone. The planet's there, but it's just a lifeless husk. It's dead. There's nothing left there. Nothing worthwhile left there. That's why they're battling on Earth, because their home is gone. And you spend the first 2 seasons digging through, digging through what's left, the remains of this dead world. Both sides fighting for the scraps of their old day, of the old glories of Cybertron. And finally, it's introduced in the show that they have an opportunity to bring it back, to restore it to its former glory, with this artifact known as the Omega Lock. Well, as it turns out, Megatron essentially he takes hostages in order to gain access to it. He takes essentially the Autobots when they're on Earth befriend some humans, and they become human Autobots. They really join the group and become members of the Autobots. They do their fair share, and essentially the Decepticons manage to capture them, and they use them as bargaining chips to gain access to the Omega Lock. And another Paladin decision, without even hesitation, does it. He gives them access to the Omega Lock in exchange for the innocents' lives. And what you're going to see in this clip is Megatron has activated the Omega Lock, and not only does he intend to rejuvenate Cybertron in his own image, but he also intends to, quote-unquote, cyberform Earth, which means he's going to turn Earth into another Cybertron, which in the process is going to kill every single human being on the planet, and all other forms of indigenous life. He is going to destroy our world to make a second Cybertron, and then build Cybertron in his own image, from which he will subjugate both worlds. And what you're going to see here is how Optimus reacts to this. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and give you a link to the clip. Go ahead and click on Aria and take a look and see what happens. Okay, are we back? All right. So in this clip, classic. It's one of the best parts of the series. This episode, in fact, is one of the best in the entire series. And for Optimus, it really is his shining moment as a Paladin. It is the pinnacle of what it means to be a Paladin. And I don't just mean the fact that in the episode he looks like a freaking Paladin. He looks like the big armored guy with the big sword. No. There's 3 things I want you to note with this. And remember that when you're thinking of how to play your Paladin or a Paladin you might play in the future. Number 1, this was a very desperate situation with a very questionable outcome. In fact, Optimus, Starscream, in the end there, expresses his rage for what Optimus did. And he's not the only one. The Autobots themselves, after they escape, express the same problems to Optimus. But ultimately, he didn't hesitate. Number 2, he did not hesitate. He did what he believed was right in that moment. He knew that the only way this would end is number 3, not by trying to overpower the others and regain access to the Omega Lock, because then it would always be there to be a risk to Earth. He would rather sacrifice this. He will doom his own world, his own dead world, for the sake of an innocent living world. And that's such a Paladin. If you want to be a Paladin, be like Optimus Prime in this episode. Act for others, not yourself. Do what you believe is right when you believe it's right, and because you believe it's right. And that's how you play a Paladin. Naturally, there's going to be people who disagree with what I have to say, because there's a lot of people out there who view Paladins differently. That's fine, you can view it how you like. If you disagreed with something I had to say, or if you feel that I left something out, please feel free to leave a comment below. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. I hope you continue to enjoy Guild Month, and as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.